According to the theory of evolution, the origin and development of the universe and all its systems can be explained solely on the basis of time, chance, and continuing processes. All living things have arisen from a single-celled organism. A second and opposing worldview is the concept of creation. According to the theory of creation, everything in the universe has come into being through the design, purpose, and deliberate acts of a supernatural creator. That means this creator created the universe, the earth, and all life on earth, including all types of plants and animals, as well as humans. On today's edition of Origins, we'll talk about the statistical impossibility of evolution.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Origins. I'm Don Chapman, and I'm your host. It's so good having you with us today. Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and use it to validate the truth of creation. And I have a guest with me today who's going to make that job very easy. His name is Ralph Muncaster, and he has come to us from California. Ralph, it's great to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, your training is in engineering and business administration.
Yes.
And so today we're going to talk about the statistical impossibility, not improbability, but impossibility of evolution. Is that right?
Impossible by human standards, yes.
So you're going to give us some facts and figures.
I love them. Having an engineering background, you can appreciate that, I'm sure.
Well, give us some foundation and then take it away, friend.
Be happy to. Well, first of all, what I'd like to talk about is something I think we all too often forget. I think everyone realizes that creation requires faith, because creation, people think of a divine designer. And anytime you say divine designer, of course that leads one to Webster's definition, the originator of the universe, and that's God. So everyone thinks, of course, God requires faith. However, seldom do people think of the fact that evolution requires faith too.
Absolutely.
We're asking people to believe an incredible story about all these random molecules coming, or even pieces of molecules, parts of molecules coming together, forming from inanimate, something that's not even alive, matter, coming to life, and then springing from the simplest life form into all these complex life forms in a human being.
I mean, all that is an absolutely established fact.
No, far from it. It's incredible faith that's required for evolution as well. And we'll be talking about which is more probable today, because I love, again, getting into probability. As an engineer, you're constantly dealing with statistics and probability and designing of bridges and things like that.
Okay.
Now, it's important to, again, understand that either things came about naturalistically through random chance or through some form of design. It had to have been one or the other.
That's right.
It can't be both. There's not a mix of that. Next, I'd like to talk about hard science versus soft science. This is pretty important. Soft sciences are what evolutionists use. Soft sciences are sciences like paleontology, study of fossils, anthropology. Soft sciences use imagination. They draw pictures. They tell stories. Now, these picture stories can be used to talk about a fish becoming a frog, They could be used to talk about a frog becoming a prince. I don't know about you, but I read about that when I was a child. You can virtually tell a story about anything you want to, and you can draw a picture to support the story.
Could be Darwin, could be Mother Goose.
It could be anything.
That's right.
Hard sciences, like physics, like engineering, do things like predict eclipses, build bridges, send men to the moon.
So when you were an engineer building a bridge, you didn't just draw a pretty picture.
No.
There's hard facts to support that.
Yes.
And that's what we're calling hard science.
Yes. In my book, Dismantling Evolution, I actually address the building of bridges, and I show how you can, using misleading artwork, you can draw something that looks very strong and in reality would be very weak. And yet, engineering-wise, I can show something that looks weak, and you can calculate that it would be very strong.
Okay. And evolution, the evidence for evolution is in the soft science category.
Correct.
All right.
The evidence I'm going to talk about today is for creation, supporting of creation and disproving evolution is in the hard science category, the category that we place our lives every day in the hard science category with the cars we drive, elevators we go up, bridges we cross, everything.
Ralph, you're painting a very different paradigm than we usually have when we discuss evolution and creation. Usually the evolutionists want us to believe that the creationists are just basing everything on religion and superstition and that they're basing everything on science. But your paradigm is saying that the evolutionist is using soft evidence and the creationist is using hard evidence.
Absolutely.
That's revolutionary.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'll explain why.
Great.
I used to be an evolutionist. So it took hard evidence to change me. It takes a lot to give up your pride, and that's what I did.
That's right.
The fossil record, this is soft science. I want to talk about that very briefly. The contention are these beautiful pictures. Here we have the famous pictures that chimpanzee eventually turns into a human being. They're all nice pictures. And now some of these were actually hoaxes. Some of these pictures came from literal hoaxes, and I'll talk about some of those. And of course, you can draw a whole line of, if you wanted to, take the first cell of life, you could draw pictures of the first cell of life becoming a human being eventually. Draw anything you want. And that's what's happening. And it's based on gradual mutational change, which is also a problem.
So there isn't a fossil record for those three middle pieces there?
There are lots of missing pieces. In
Okay.
fact, as I point out here, there are no missing links in any of the different classes. As a matter of fact, I have many quotes in my book by paleontologists that acknowledge this enormous problem. And many of them say that fossils were never intended to try to prove evolution. And of course, even Darwin admits the problems, and many since then, of course, have corroborated that. Next, I want to talk about what Darwin said. He said, why, if species have descended from other species by intensely fine graduations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why not all nature in confusion? Why is not all nature in confusion instead of species be, as we see them, well defined? In other words, a true transition would have a part of an eye or a part of a feather. When we look at fossils, we see fully formed everything. It works.
Okay.
Next, Mark Ridley says the gradual change of fossil species has never been part of the evidence for evolution. Darwin showed that the record was useless for testing between evolution and special creation because it has great gaps in it. He also said no real evolutionist uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of evolution as opposed to special creation. Then we get to Michael Denton, who said not only has paleontology failed to come up with the fossil missing links, but hypothetically reconstructions of major evolutionary developments such as that linking birds to reptiles are beginning to look more like fantasies than serious conjectures. Moving on, George Gaylord Simpson, another evolutionary paleontologist, says the gaps, of course, in the horses in this case, is true of all 32 orders of mammals, not just horses. The earliest and most primitive known members of every order already have the basic ordinal characters, and in no case is an approximately continuous species or sequence from one order to the next known.
So there is absolutely no evidence of any transitional forms between any species anywhere in the whole chain?
Nowhere.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to go up to the board as we talk about the Cambrian explosion and what all that means, and show the folks the problem that brings to the whole evolutionary situation.
Well, the Cambrian explosion is a well-known, basically this is a huge grouping of fossils that scientists believe came about hundreds of millions of years ago, but all within a very short period of time. Now, this creates a problem for evolutionists, and even Darwin acknowledged the problem of the Cambrian explosion, because the whole premise of evolution requires this gradualistic change that he talked about. Now, Darwin believed back then that the fossil record would eventually demonstrate how this happened.
And has it?
Well, there weren't a lot of fossils in Darwin's day. That's why he said it.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, today, experts in the field of paleontology say we've found basically all the species we're going to find. In fact, some 99.5% is what they estimate of the species is what they have found, and they still have not solved the problem.
So essentially today we have the fossil record, we have no explanation.
No explanation. Now, the Cambrian explosion fits much more closely what a designer would do. It fits much more closely, in fact, what the Bible says in terms of all these creatures being designed into the world all at approximately the same time.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. So we also find a number of hoaxes because a lot of scientists are eager to find these missing links, and especially this ape to human being missing link. So what's happened? We've had things like the Piltdown Man. In 1912, this was big news. In the 1970s, we found that it was a total hoax, that the teeth were filed, that it was a skull of a human being that was artificially aged, connected to the jaw of an ape. Total hoax.
So we aren't looking for truth here, we're deceiving people on purpose.
Deceiving people.
That's right.
We have the Nebraska Man. Someone found a tooth. The next thing you know, what did I say about drawing pictures? The next thing you know, you find in museums, here's an example. A whole person was drawn based on a tooth. Not only the person, his family was drawn in this nice little setting. Okay, all based on a tooth. Later we found that tooth was not even from a human being. It was found from an extinct pig. Again, soft science can draw anything that it wants to try to create this story. Then we have Java Man. Well, Java Man happens to actually be a skull of a human being, but about some far distance away they found a femur from an ape. So they tried to make a connection. What they didn't say was later on they actually had found, it was a gravel pit, by the way, which means there could have been a lot of movement and mixing. They also found in that same region, the same gravel pit, a full human skull. So, I mean, what's it saying? A lot of stuff was mixed up. The femur didn't go with this part of the Java Man skull. They were two different things. So this shows you how it can be misleading. But let's analyze first life. Let's get down to some hard statistics. Now, the simplest form of life, scientists agree, was some form of a very basic cell, a bacterium. Now, we're not talking about a bacterium with a nucleus. We're talking about a simple, very simple cell. But the simplest of cells of all have to have at least two components, plus membranes and some things, but it has to have at least a DNA molecule, and it has to have amino acids. So two things are necessary for a cell. Now, let's just take a quick look at a DNA. I think everybody's seen a picture of this spiral ladder. Each of these rungs of a ladder is called a base pair. It's a nucleotide.
Okay.
Now, this is very important because we're going to talk about some of what is necessary in a minute with these nucleotides. Then we have amino acids, which, of course, are necessary for the proteins, which are the building blocks of all the systems in your body. You need the proteins, which everything from your hair to your fingernails and everything else. Okay, we're going to talk about a few problems that are necessary for this random development at a molecular level for that very first cell of life. One of the most basic problems is called chirality. It's a central problem. It's a big sounding word, but it's a very simple concept. Remember, I talked about these base pairs, the rungs of the ladder, the nucleotides. Each one of those has to be the same orientation. It's called left-handed or right-handed. You could think of it as flipping a coin. It's either heads or tails.
Okay.
Now, they all the DNA base pairs have to be the same. All the amino acid pieces all have to also be the same. Now, the very simplest bacterium that science can conceive of would have 100,000 nucleotides.
Think of that.
Now, we've never seen one that small. The smallest that science has ever seen is about 500,000.
Okay.
But they say maybe it could go down to as small as 100,000. Below that, couldn't function. The smallest amino acid that could work would be about 10,000 amino acids. So we have 100,000 base pairs that would all have to be flipped heads. We have 10,000 amino acids that would all have to be flipped tails. So the requirement in a random process would be the essential effect of having 110,000 flips of heads in a row. How likely is that? As I mentioned, 100,000 minimum DNA base pairs, 10,000 amino acids, and the odds are incredibly against that ever happening. And we have another issue here. We have to get life-specific amino acids. The odds of that, I won't go through all the math, but it's 1 chance in 10 to the 6,021th power.
That's a lot of zeros.
That's just for the life-specific amino acids. The correct amino acid in the right place. And all these are, I go into great detail in my book, but that has the odds of about 1 chance in 10 to the 13,000th power. So this is also highly unlikely. Okay? The correct genetic material placement. In other words, the right gene has to be in the right place. The odds of that are about 1 chance in 10 to the 60,000th power. Again, these are all incredibly large numbers. So, bottom line, we can start looking at things like chirality, life-specific amino acids, the correct amino acid in the right place, the correct material, and the correct gene sequencing. And all this together gives us an incredibly unlikely probability that it could even happen. If you add it all together, the statistical possibility is 1 chance in 10 to the 112,000th power. Now, let me put it in perspective real quickly. What would that be like? That would be like if we were to take the entire universe and blow it up. Now, let me start with, your body has about 75 trillion atoms in it. That's a lot of atoms.
That's a lot of atoms.
Now, let's take not only your body, but everybody else's body, plus the Earth, plus the Sun, plus Jupiter and the whole solar system, plus the 1 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, plus 1 billion stars in each of 1 billion galaxies. That's how much stuff is in the universe. Explode it all into atoms and explode all the atoms into subatomic particles. Pick an electron and try to pick a marked electron. Now, you would have more chance of picking that electron by far than all this coming together randomly. By far, that shows you how impossible it is. But it's worse than that. It would be like picking out that electron not once, but 1,376 times in a row. That's like taking 1,376 universes and picking an electron, and that's what the probability of evolution for that first cell is. And I want to point this out. Real important. All that does is get your stuff together. What do you have? You have a dead cell.
Right.
you still have to put life in that cell.
Ralph, I think you've done an incredible job here of describing impossible to us. Folks, we got to take a break, and Ralph's going to come back, and he's going to wrap this up for us and just make it clear to you that the more we've learned from science about the complexity Hi, I'm Don Chapman, and this is Origins, and welcome back from our break. I'm here with Ralph Muncaster, and he has just shown us mathematically how absolutely impossible evolution is once we understand the complexity of the single cell. And Ralph, just before we left, you said to us that that's just to make a dead cell, to get all the components of one cell in place. We still haven't gotten life into that cell.
Right.
And then that cell would have to do a whole lot of other things before you get to where we are today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the first point is that if you can't get to that very first cell, even a dead cell, all the rest of the fossils and the ape demand, none of that makes a difference. It's all moot. You have to get to the first cell, even a dead cell. Then you have to put life into it. And then from there you have to go from a dead cell or a live cell to 1.7 million species, all different. You have to go from a very simple 100,000 base pair DNA unit to a human being that has 3.2 billion base pairs. So the problem goes on and on and on. Evolution is just clearly impossible.
You know, it used to be that everyone thought religion was the enemy of evolution. It's hard science that's the enemy of evolution. It just shows us that it just can't be. You know, I guess my question to you is, as we begin to wrap up, is to just ask you, you know, you've understood that this is impossible, but obviously we're still teaching all our kids in grade school and elementary school and high school and college that this is the fact. When does someone stand up and say the king doesn't have any clothes on, that this just isn't true? Is that going to happen?
Well, it's very sad. Even people like Stephen C. Myers from Cambridge, for example, he has a PhD in philosophy and history of science, and he says that no serious researcher nowadays would try to invoke chance as an explanation of origin. So people are recognizing it. However, when you talk to people in the community, they're a little afraid to speak out against evolution yet, because after all, a lot of their colleagues would end up losing their jobs.
Losing their grants and all of the things that go with that.
That's correct.
Folks, I've got a word for you as we wrap up our show today. I want to tell you two things that I know for sure. The world is not flat, and evolution can't be true. And we've got the proof for that. And, you know, if you have any questions or doubts, I would love for you to pick up Ralph's book. It's called Dismantling Evolution. building the case for intelligent design, and he goes into great detail to all of the things that he's run through real quickly here on our show. Ralph, we're indebted to you for coming and making these cases clear. I bet you there's a lot of mom and dads out there taping this show to show it to their 8th and 9th graders, to say, you got to watch this and you got to take it in and tell your science teacher. And I think there's going to be a lot of science teachers going, and duh, next week in school. So
better yet, take my book in and challenge them with that.
Yeah, and it's so good to know. You know, God is the author of science, and the facts are on His side. You know, if you have any questions or doubts about what we've said, any questions that you have, and you know, I hope we've opened up some discussion with those of you who are skeptical. Write to us at Origins, CTV, Wall, PA, 15148, or get on the website there. There's the address there on your screen. If I can't answer your question, we'll find the right scientist who will, and we'll get back to you. You know, I just want to remind you today as we wrap up that it's God's view that He created you. That ought to be your worldview too. It's been great having you with us, and I hope you'll join us next time. God bless you.
Copy of the PowerPoint information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 445 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins program number 445, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.